I was 26 years old and working as a nurse at a hospital about an hour away from where I lived. The shifts were long and exhausting, especially the night shifts, which often had me driving home in the dead of night, completely drained. I was used to it, though. I considered myself a pretty level-headed person, not easily spooked. My job had taught me how to stay calm in a crisis, how to push through fear and exhaustion to do what needed to be done. I never thought that skill would be tested on a lonely stretch of highway, far from the sterile, controlled chaos of the ER. This happened on a Thursday night in late autumn. I just finished a grueling 12-hour shift, and all I wanted was my bed. The sky had opened up about halfway through my drive, a cold, relentless rain that turned the highway into a slick black mirror. The wipers on my old sedan were fighting a losing battle, and the rhythmic slap, slap, slap was making my tired eyes even heavier. I was on a long, dark stretch of road, the kind that cuts through thick forest with no streetlights or houses for miles. It was just me, the rain, and the hypnotizing white lines flicking past in my headlights. That's when I felt it, a sudden, violent shudder from the front of the car, followed by the unmistakable thump, thump, thump of a flat tire. I let out a groan of frustration and carefully guided the limping car onto the narrow, muddy shoulder. I turned on my hazard lights and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. All I could hear now was the furious drumming of rain on the roof of my car. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. I was completely, utterly stranded. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to fight off the wave of panic that was threatening to wash over my exhaustion. Changing a tire in a storm like this, on a narrow shoulder with cars flying by, was not only difficult, but dangerous. My only real option was to wait for someone to stop, or for a state trooper to happen by. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw a pair of headlights approaching from behind me. They slowed down, and my heart leapt with relief. The vehicle pulled up behind my car, its high beams cutting through the downpour. It was a tow truck, an old, slightly rusty one, but a tow truck nonetheless. I couldn't believe my luck. A man got out and walked towards my window, his figure silhouetted by his own headlights. He was wearing a heavy raincoat, the hood pulled low over his face. I rolled down my window just a crack, and a spray of cold rain hit my face. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, hard to hear over the storm. "Yeah, flat tire," I yelled back. "My phone has no service." He nodded slowly, his face still hidden in the shadows of his hood. "This is a bad spot to be stuck. I can give you a lift to the next town. There's a 24-hour diner there. We can get your car in the morning." It sounded like a perfect plan. I was too tired and soaked to even think about arguing. I grabbed my purse and my phone and got out of the car, locking it behind me. He was already back in his truck. I hurried around and climbed into the passenger seat, the cab of the truck feeling surprisingly warm after the cold rain. "Thanks so much," I said, trying to catch my breath. "You're a lifesaver." He just grunted in response and pulled the truck back onto the highway. That's when I started to feel that something was wrong. The inside of the truck was weird. It was cluttered with old fast food bags and random tools, but underneath it all, there was a strange, sweet, almost chemical smell, like air freshener trying to cover up something bad. And the driver himself was unnerving. He never took his hood off. I couldn't see his face at all, just the dark space where it should have been. He didn't say anything for a few minutes, just drove. The silence was heavy, uncomfortable. "So, you work around here?" he finally asked, his voice startling me. Yeah," I said. "I'm a nurse. Just got off a shift." He turned his head slightly, and for a second, I thought I saw the glint of his eyes in the darkness of his hood. "A nurse," he repeated slowly. "You must see a lot of things. People in pain." A chill crept up my spine. His tone was strange, almost hungry. "It's a job," I said, trying to sound casual, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I just wanted to get to that diner. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. "That's a nice watch you have." I looked down at my wrist. I was wearing my simple, cheap work watch, the one with the plastic band. There was nothing nice about it. But the terrifying part was that my sleeve had been pulled down over it the entire time. There was no way he could have seen it, not unless he'd been watching me before he pulled over. My mind flashed back to the dark road. Had he been parked somewhere, watching me wait? My training kicked in. Don't show fear. Stay calm. Assess the situation. I needed to get out of the truck. You know, I said, forcing a light tone, I think I see the lights of that diner up ahead. You can just drop me at the entrance. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached over and I heard a loud click as he locked the doors. I don't think so, he whispered. Pure, cold terror seized me. This was it. This was a crisis. I didn't think. I reacted. I slammed my hand down on the door lock, yanked the handle, and threw my entire body weight against the door. It flew open with a roar of wind and rain. He shouted in surprise and grabbed for my arm, but I was already halfway out. I hit the wet asphalt and rolled, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Pain shot through my shoulder and hip. I heard the squeal of the tow truck's brakes as I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain. I plunged off the road and into the dark, tangled woods. Thorns and branches scratching at my face and arms. I could hear his door slam shut. Get back here, he roared, his voice terrifyingly close. I just ran, blindly, tripping over roots, slipping in the mud fueled by a surge of adrenaline I'd never felt before. I didn't look back. I just ran deeper into the woods, the sound of the rain and my own ragged breaths filling my ears. Eventually, I collapsed behind a large fallen tree, trying to muffle my sobs. I waited, listening. I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth for what felt like an eternity. Then, silence. I stayed hidden for over an hour, shivering from cold and fear, before I dared to move. I stumbled through the woods in the direction I thought the highway was, and eventually emerged onto a different, smaller road. A car finally came along, and the driver, a kind, elderly woman, took one look at my muddy, bloody state and called 911. The police searched, but they never found him or the tow truck. My car was gone when they went back for it. It was like he had vanished into the storm. They told me I was lucky to be alive. But the thing that haunts me, the thought that still keeps me awake on rainy nights, is that smell in his truck. That sweet chemical smell. I know that smell. I've smelled it in the hospital. It's the smell they use to clean up blood. This happened a couple of years ago when I was in college. I was trying to make some extra cash, so I took a job working the late-night shift at the campus radio station. It wasn't a glamorous gig by any means. The station itself was this tiny, isolated building at the edge of campus, right up against a patch of dense woods. Most nights were dead silent. Just me, the music, and the low hum of the equipment. I was a bit of a loner back then, so I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I kind of loved it, especially on rainy nights. There was something peaceful about being tucked away in that little booth, watching the storm rage outside, while I broadcast to a handful of insomniacs and long-haul truckers. This particular night started out like any other. It was a Tuesday, maybe a Wednesday, and it had been pouring rain since the sun went down. A real heavy, persistent downpour that drummed against the roof and made the whole world feel like it was underwater. I was a few hours into my shift, just going through the motions, when the lights flickered and died for a second, before the backup generator kicked in. It happened all the time during storms, so I didn't think anything of it. But when the main power came back on a minute later, I noticed the call-in line was acting weird. Usually, the little light on the phone would be a solid green, but now it was blinking. Just this faint, erratic pulse. I figured the storm had messed with the connection and ignored it. My show didn't get many callers anyway. That's when the first weird thing happened. A message came through on our ancient request system, one that nobody ever used. It was basically a text-to-screen program from the early 2000s. The message just said, "Play track 7 from the Black Album." There was no name, no dedication, nothing. Just that one oddly specific request. I was a little thrown off. First, because someone was actually listening. And second, because the request was so vague. I had no idea what the Black Album was. I had to Google it and found a few possibilities. But then, another message came through from the same number. The one in the rain knows. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty old building. It was just weird enough to be unsettling. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was probably some other student trying to mess with me. Still, I couldn't stop myself from glancing out the large window that looked into the darkness. I couldn't see anything past my own reflection in the rain-streaked glass. I decided to ignore the request and put on a long, generic rock ballad instead. I tried to settle back into my routine, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. A few minutes later, the motion-activated security light over the back entrance suddenly switched on, flooding the small parking lot with a harsh white light. I leaned forward and squinted at the grainy security monitor next to my console. My heart stopped. There was a figure standing just at the edge of the woods, right where the light cut off. They were tall and thin, wearing a dark hooded raincoat that obscured their face. And they were perfectly still, just standing there in the downpour, staring directly at the station, directly at my window. I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, my eyes glued to the monitor. The rain was coming down so hard, it was distorting the camera feed, but there was no mistaking what I was seeing. The figure slowly lifted a hand and pointed, first at the security camera. Then they turned their finger and pointed directly at the control room window where I was sitting. The phone line, which had been blinking erratically all night, suddenly rang. A loud, piercing shriek that cut through the sound of the rain. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I don't know why I answered. I think a part of me needed to know. I lifted the receiver to my ear, and there was just static for a second. Then a voice, low and distorted, like it was being put through some kind of modulator, whispered a single sentence. "I know you're alone." I slammed the phone down, my breath catching in my throat. I shot up from my chair and ran to the control room door, fumbling with the lock. It was a heavy, soundproofed door, the only real security in the whole building. As my fingers closed around the deadbolt, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The main door to the station, the one I was positive I had locked when I came in, was standing slightly ajar, a dark, wet crack opening into the night. He was already inside. I didn't scream. I didn't have time to. I threw the bolt on the control room door, killed my microphone, and hit the switch that cut the on-air light. My only thought was to make it seem like no one was here, like the station was running on auto. I dove under the broadcast desk, pulling my knees to my chest and trying to silence my ragged breathing. And then, I heard it. The slow, wet creak of the front door opening wider, followed by footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, leaving wet tracks all over the linoleum floor of the hallway. They paced back and forth, just outside my door. I could hear the squelch of their boots with every step. Then, they stopped. The doorknob on my supposedly locked door began to jiggle, violently at first, then slower, more deliberately. I clamped a hand over my mouth, positive he could hear my heart hammering against my ribs. I stayed hidden under that desk for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rain, the silence, and the terrifying sound of someone trying to get into my room. Finally, after what could have been minutes or hours, I heard the footsteps retreat. The front door opened and slammed shut. I didn't move. I stayed there, cramped and terrified, until the first hint of dawn started to break through the clouds. I never went back to that radio station again. The police found nothing but a set of muddy footprints and a single, wet handprint pressed against the outside of the control room window. They never found out who it was. But the thing that still haunts me, the question I can't get out of my head, is how he knew I was there. How he knew to text that specific request system. How he knew I was alone. I still get chills every time it rains at night. And I can't listen to the radio anymore without thinking of that distorted voice and the figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me in the rain. This took place during my sophomore year of college. My parents were helping me out with tuition, but for everything else, I was on my own. Rent, books, food, it all added up, so I was always looking for side hustles. That's how I ended up house sitting for one of my professors, Dr. Albright. He and his family lived in this incredible modern house about 30 minutes outside of town, kind of on its own in a heavily wooded area. It was one of those places with huge floor-to-ceiling windows and a fancy minimalist design. To me, a broke college kid used to a cramped dorm room, it felt like a palace. The job was simple. Keep an eye on the place for a long weekend while they were away, water the plants, and bring in the mail. Easy money. I'd done it for them once before in the summer, and it was great. This time, however, was in the middle of October. And on the second night, a massive storm rolled in. I'm not talking about a little shower. This was a full-blown, biblical-level deluge, the kind where the rain comes down in solid sheets and the wind howls like a grieving ghost. At first, I didn't mind. I was curled up on a couch that cost more than my car, watching the lightning flash over the trees through the massive living room window. It was dramatic and kind of cozy. The house had this state-of-the-art security system Dr. Albright had walked me through. Cameras, motion sensors, the whole 9 yards. I remember him joking that the place was smarter than he was. Around 10 p.m., the lights buzzed and flickered, then went out completely. A moment of pure suffocating darkness, and then the emergency lights and the hum of the backup generator kicked on. I figured the storm had knocked out the power, which wasn't surprising given our location. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a notification from the security system's app, power outage detected, system rebooting. When the main power flickered back on a few minutes later, my phone buzzed again, system online. Everything seemed fine, but the storm was getting worse. The wind was so strong it was rattling the huge panes of glass in their frames. That's when I started to hear it. A faint, rhythmic thudding sound from outside. Thud, thud, thud. I muted the TV and listened. It was hard to distinguish from the sounds of the storm, but it was there, consistent. I told myself it was probably a loose branch hitting the side of the house. Still, I got up and walked to the kitchen window, which looked out over the back patio and the sprawling dark yard. As I peered out, the motion-activated floodlight above the patio door suddenly flared to life, bathing the deck in harsh, sterile light. I scanned the area, but saw nothing, just the rain lashing down, creating a shimmering curtain of water. Then, just as suddenly, the light clicked off. I stood there for a second, my heart beating a little faster. My phone buzzed again. Another security notification. Motion detected, back patio. I quickly opened the app and pulled up the live feed for the back patio camera. The connection was choppy, the image glitching and pixelating because of the storm. For a few seconds, it was just a mess of digital snow. Then, for a single horrifying moment, the image cleared, and I saw it, a shape, a tall, distorted figure standing at the far edge of the patio, almost swallowed by the darkness of the woods. It was just a silhouette, but it was undeniably human. Before I could get a better look, the feed cut out completely, replaced by a connection lost error message. My blood ran cold. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Was it a person? Or was I just seeing things in the static, letting the storm get to me? As I was trying to rationalize it, the landline on the kitchen counter rang. The sound was so loud in the quiet house that I actually jumped. Who would be calling the house phone this late? My first thought was that it was Dr. Albright, maybe calling to check in because of the storm. Fighting the tremor in my hand, I picked it up. Hello? Silence. No, not silence. I could hear something. It was the sound of rain, but it sounded close, like the person on the other end was standing outside with their phone to the storm. Then, underneath the rain, I heard another sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Hello? Who is this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The tapping stopped. I heard what sounded like a long, slow exhale, and then the line went dead. I stood there, the dead phone pressed to my ear, a wave of pure dread washing over me, because I had just realized something. The tapping hadn't just been coming through the phone. I could still hear it, faintly, coming from the other side of the room. I slowly turned my head towards the massive wall of glass in the living room, which looked out into the black, rain-swept night. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. My breath hitched in my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I just stared at the dark glass, at my own terrified reflection staring back. Then a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the entire world outside for one brilliant, horrifying second. And there was a face, pressed against the glass, a man's face, pale and gaunt, with dark, hollow eyes as in hair plastered to his skull by the rain. His lips were pulled back in a wide, unnatural grin, and he was tapping on the glass with one long, dirty fingernail. The world dissolved into a tunnel of pure terror. I didn't scream. I couldn't. All the air had been sucked from my lungs. I threw the phone and ran. I sprinted up the stairs, my feet slipping on the polished wood, my mind blank with panic. Dr. Albright had told me the master bedroom door was reinforced, a makeshift safe room. That was my only thought. Get to the room. I slammed the heavy door shut and fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. I finally heard the satisfying clunk as the bolt slid home. And a moment too soon. Downstairs, I heard the sound of shattering glass. He was in the house. I scrambled backwards, away from the door, and hid in the walk-in closet, pulling the door shut behind me. I could hear his footsteps, slow, wet, deliberate. He was walking through the broken glass. Then he started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. I huddled in the darkness, trying to muffle my sobs into the sleeve of my sweater. The footsteps stopped, right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob rattled. He pushed against the door. It held firm. Then came a roar of pure rage from the other side, a guttural, inhuman sound, followed by a series of heavy, splintering blows against the door. He was trying to break it down. Just as I thought the wood would give way, the banging stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then, in the distance, I heard it. A faint, rising siren. The security system. When the window broke, it must have triggered a silent alarm. The footsteps in the hall suddenly became frantic. I heard him run back down the stairs. And then the sound of the front door being thrown open and slamming shut. He was gone. I stayed in that closet, shaking and crying, until I heard the police calling my name from downstairs. They found the house in a wreck. The living room window was completely shattered. There were muddy footprints and shards of glass everywhere. The only thing that was missing was a single, framed photo of the Albright family that had been on the mantle. Nothing else was touched. The police never found him. He vanished back into the woods, back into the storm. I never stayed in that house again. I can't shake the feeling that he wasn't there for a random break-in. He wasn't after things. He took their picture. It makes me think he wasn't there for me at all. He was there for them, and he was just waiting.